My old boss showed up at my new office uninvited, smiling, pretending it was a coincidence. What he didn't know is that I wasn't the only person he'd done this to, and by the end of that week, 5 other women were about to make sure he never did it again. Stay till the end, because the twist isn't what happens to me. It's who else walks into this story. Okay, Reddit. Story time. Grab something to hold on to, because this one starts as a workplace horror story and ends somewhere I genuinely did not see coming, and I lived it. For a year and a half, I worked under a man I'm going to call Derek, because his real name doesn't deserve to exist in this story. Derek was the kind of boss who mistook cruelty for leadership. He'd humiliate me in meetings, call me his assistant to clients even though that was never my title, sign me up for trainings I didn't need just to remind me, subtly, constantly, that he thought I was replaceable. He never went to college, and somehow that fact came up in conversation roughly 400 times a year, usually followed by him reminding everyone that people with degrees now worked for him, which, ironically, might be the single most insecure sentence a grown man can say out loud in a professional setting. I left. Quietly. New job, new city, new title, director actually, which felt like finally exhaling after 18 months of holding my breath. I didn't even put my old company on LinkedIn out of pure instinct, some part of me already knowing Derek was the kind of man who'd take a promotion personally. 3 weeks into my new job, our receptionist buzzed me. "There's a Derek here to see you," says he's an old friend, just in the neighborhood. My stomach dropped so fast I nearly followed it to the floor. Derek's company does road construction. Crews pave at 1 in the morning to avoid traffic, not at 2 in the afternoon on a random Tuesday. There was no version of just in the neighborhood. That wasn't a lie he hadn't even bothered making believable. I didn't go out. I told the receptionist I was in a meeting, and through the glass doors, I watched him actually smile. Not confused, not disappointed, smile. Like this was exactly the reaction he'd been hoping for. He said, loud enough for the whole lobby to hear, "Guess she thinks she's a big shot now." Then he left, for 10 minutes, and came back at 4:45, 15 minutes before we closed, and didn't leave the parking lot until almost 6, long after everyone else had gone home. That's when I stopped thinking this was an ego trip and started thinking this was something else entirely. I told my new boss, Nicole, everything, the whole 18 months, the humiliation, the way he'd talk about the woman who had my job before me, how he'd say things like, "I think she was in love with me," about someone who, as far as I could tell, mostly just wanted to survive her shift without crying in the bathroom. Nicole didn't blink. She called security, pulled the camera footage, had me escorted home by one of our guards, and sent me home to work remotely for the week. I remember thinking, this is what it's supposed to feel like to have someone in charge who actually gives a damn. It was almost disorienting how normal basic human decency felt after Derek. Here's where it gets strange, though, the part 1 promised you at the beginning. Nicole called me 2 days later, and her voice had this careful, controlled calm that immediately told me something bigger was happening. She said, "I need you to look at something." She'd pulled Derek's company name and quietly reached out to her own network, because it turns out Nicole used to work in HR compliance before she moved into operations, and old habits, thankfully, die hard. Within 48 hours, she'd found 4 other women. 4. All former employees of Derek's company, spread across 3 different jobs over 6 years, every single one of them describing the exact same pattern. Humiliation while employed, then a visit, sometimes weeks after they'd left, sometimes years, always timed suspiciously close to a promotion, a raise, a LinkedIn update, some sign that they'd moved on and thrived without him. One of them, a woman named Priya, had already filed a restraining order 2 years earlier. It had expired. Nobody renewed it because nobody warned her Derek might resurface. Another, Sam, had quietly changed her commute route for 8 months straight after a similar office visit and never told a single coworker why, because she thought she was the only one, and she thought no one would believe her over a man who golfed with half the city council. We weren't 5 separate incidents. We were one long pattern that nobody had ever put next to itself until Nicole, almost by accident, laid all 5 stories on the same table. That's the part that still gets me. Not that he did it. Some men do this, and it's ugly, and it's not surprising once you've lived through it once. What gets me is how close we all came to thinking it was just us. 5 separate women, 5 separate cities, 5 separate years of assuming we were each uniquely unlucky, when actually we were just numbers in the same man's pattern, and none of us had ever said it out loud to anyone who'd listened properly until now. We built the case together. Diaries, screenshots of LinkedIn views timed suspiciously close to visits, security footage, exit interviews HR departments had quietly filed away and forgotten about. One attorney, 5 clients, one very long, very satisfying folder of evidence. Here's the twist you didn't see coming, and honestly, neither did I. The final piece wasn't even something we found. It was something Derek did himself 3 days before our joint restraining order hearing. He showed up at Priya's workplace too, the same week, the same pattern, except this time Priya's office had upgraded their security system, and this time 5 women, 1 attorney, and a very thorough compilation of matching footage from 3 different companies landed on a detective's desk within the same 48 hours. He was arrested in the parking lot of his own construction company, in front of his own crew, for violation of a restraining order he didn't even know had been filed against him yet. Priya's renewed one, filed that same morning, the timing so absurd it felt scripted. I wasn't there to see it. I didn't need to be. I just needed the phone call from Priya, laughing and crying at the same time, saying, he looked so confused. He genuinely thought none of us would ever compare notes. That's the real twist, if you're keeping score. The villain of this story wasn't defeated by one clever woman outsmarting him. He was defeated by every woman he'd ever underestimated finally being in the same room. Update, because there's always an update. It's been 2 months. The restraining orders held. Derek's company quietly restructured, which is corporate speak for the family who owns it deciding a stalking arrest was bad for business relationships they actually cared about. He hasn't shown up anywhere since. Not to me, not to Priya, not to Sam, not to anyone. I still flinch a little when the receptionist buzzes my desk. Old habits, apparently, don't leave just because the threat did. But now, when I flinch, I think about 5 women who used to think they were each carrying this alone. Sitting on a group text now, checking in on each other, sharing memes, occasionally still saying, "Can you believe this actually happened?" like it's a story about someone else's life instead of our own. I used to think surviving Derek meant getting away from him quietly and never looking back. Turns out it meant something louder. 5 women finally being loud in the same direction at the same time about the same man. So tell me, did you see that twist coming? Or did it get you too? Drop a comment if you've ever had a small world, wrong way moment like this one. And if this story kept you here till the end, hit subscribe, because on this channel, the drama always has a second act you don't expect. See you in the next one.